you can write forever, You can write, I can be writing songs when I'm 50 years old, but chances are I won't be as hot a performer in those days. We'll see.
I can still imagine her saying that she could be writing songs even when she was 50 years old, knowing full well that time changes every performer, yet somehow believing that the music itself would always matter more than image or age. Bobbie Gentry was born Roberta Lee Streeter on July 27, 1942, and long before the world knew her name, she was already shaping a story unlike any other in American music. She would go on to become one of the first women in the industry to fully write, arrange, and produce her own work, quietly redefining what creative control looked like in a business that rarely offered it to women. Her rise was swift and unforgettable. In 1967 she stepped into international recognition with a haunting Southern narrative song that captured the attention of millions. It climbed to the top of the charts, stayed there for weeks, and became one of the most talked about recordings of the year. By the time award season arrived, Bobbie Gentry was suddenly everywhere, earning major honors and standing out as a new voice that felt both deeply rooted and strikingly modern. Yet even at the peak of that success, there was something about her that suggested she was never chasing fame itself, only the freedom to create. Her beginnings were far from glamorous. Born near Woodland in Chickasaw County, Mississippi, she came into the world during a period of great change in the American South. After her parents separated early in her life, she was raised by her grandparents on a farm, surrounded by open land, hard work, and simplicity. There was no electricity, no indoor plumbing, and very little comfort by modern standards, but there was music. Her grandmother once traded a family milk cow for a piano, a decision that would quietly alter the course of American music history. By the age of 7, Bobbie was already composing songs, creating melodies that reflected the world around her with surprising clarity. As a teenager she spent time living with her father in Greenwood, Mississippi, where she learned to play guitar and banjo. Later she moved to California to live with her mother, who had remarried. The two even performed together briefly as a duo, giving Bobbie her first real taste of public performance. Around this time she chose her stage name, inspired by a film character whose story of resilience and ambition resonated deeply with her own experiences. After finishing high school, she moved to Los Angeles and enrolled at UCLA as a philosophy major, supporting herself through office jobs while performing quietly at night in clubs. Her talent did not go unnoticed. During an appearance in a Las Vegas revue, she caught the attention of Bob Hope, who encouraged her to keep going. She worked briefly as a fashion model and later transferred to the Los Angeles Conservatory of Music, where she studied composition, theory, and arranging, sharpening the skills that would soon set her apart from her peers. In 1966, a casual request to sit in on a recording session led to her first professional studio appearances as a singer. Although those early recordings did not make waves on the charts, they opened doors and gave her confidence. Her real ambition at the time was not to be a star but to be a songwriter. She recorded demos with the hope of selling her work to other artists, believing that staying behind the scenes might be enough. Ironically, it was her own voice on a demo that changed everything. When she brought one particular song to Capitol Records, she only sang it herself because it was more affordable than hiring someone else. That recording would soon become the centerpiece of her debut album. Initially intended as a secondary track, it was elevated after careful listening and subtle arrangement changes. When it was released in July 1967, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The song topped charts across the United States and abroad, sold millions of copies, and later earned a place among the most influential recordings of all time. What followed was a whirlwind. Capitol rushed to assemble her first album using the demos she had already recorded, but the result felt intentional rather than rushed. Blending folk, blues, jazz, and Southern storytelling, the album played like a complete portrait of where she came from and how she saw the world. It replaced a legendary record at the top of the album charts and made history as one of the most successful debut releases ever. Bobbie Gentry suddenly found herself winning major awards, praised not just as a singer but as a visionary. Rather than repeating herself, she pushed forward creatively. Her second album was a bold concept project inspired by the Mississippi Delta, with Bobbie playing nearly every instrument herself. Though it did not match the commercial success of her debut, critics later recognized it as one of the most overlooked masterpieces of its era. Around the same time, she became the first female songwriter to host her own television series on BBC Two, where her creative input shaped nearly every aspect of the show, even when official credit did not reflect it. Her work ethic was relentless. In 1968 alone, she released multiple albums, including a collaboration with Glenn Campbell that became one of the most celebrated duet records in country music history. Their voices blended effortlessly, and their performances radiated warmth and authenticity. The album topped charts, earned gold certification, and won major industry awards. Their partnership extended beyond the studio to television and touring, leaving behind a collection of performances that fans still cherish. As the years went on, Bobbie continued to experiment. Some albums leaned toward soul and pop influences, others returned to storytelling roots. While not every project found commercial success, each one reflected her refusal to be boxed into a single identity. She recorded in legendary Southern studios, worked with iconic producers, and consistently maintained control over her artistic direction. Even when chart positions dipped, her reputation among musicians and critics remained strong. By the early 1970s, changes within the music industry began to affect her career. Corporate restructuring at her label led to stalled negotiations and limited opportunities to release new work. Rather than compromise her standards, she chose patience, waiting out contracts instead of rushing into unfavorable deals. During this period, she hosted television programs, wrote for film, and made occasional appearances, but the pace slowed. Her final public performances came quietly. One television appearance in the early 1980s, where she sang for her mother seated in the audience, became an unintentional farewell. Soon after, she stepped away from public life entirely. No farewell tour, no announcement, no explanation. At just 39 years old, Bobbie Gentry simply chose a different life. In the decades that followed, speculation grew. Some wondered if she had grown tired of the industry, others believed she had always planned to leave on her own terms. Reports placed her living quietly in gated communities, first near Memphis, later in Los Angeles. She never confirmed anything herself. That silence only deepened the mystery. What became clear over time was that she had prepared for this freedom. She was a sharp businesswoman who retained control of her work and finances, allowing her to live comfortably without returning to the spotlight. While she remained unseen, her music never disappeared. Reissues, compilations, and renewed critical attention introduced her work to new generations, reminding listeners just how far ahead of her time she had been. Writers and historians continued to search for answers, producing books and documentaries that explored her career and influence. One of the most detailed accounts suggested that her departure was not an escape, but a deliberate choice rooted in self-respect and a desire for fulfillment beyond fame. Bobbie Gentry had already proven everything she needed to prove. Her legacy is undeniable. She broke barriers in a male-dominated industry, blended genres with effortless confidence, and told stories that felt deeply personal yet universally resonant. Long before it was common, she insisted on creative ownership, paving the way for countless artists who followed. Today, whether she remains in quiet comfort or simply enjoys a life far removed from the stage, her impact endures. Bobbie Gentry remains a symbol of independence, artistry, and the courage to walk away when the world expects you to stay. Her music continues to speak, her influence continues to ripple, and her story stands as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statement an artist can make is choosing when to be heard, and when to step into silence. As the years passed and Bobbie Gentry remained absent from the public stage, her silence began to speak just as loudly as her music once had. In an industry built on constant visibility, interviews, tours, and reinvention, her decision to step away entirely felt almost radical. Fans who had grown up with her voice wondered where she had gone, while younger listeners discovered her work without realizing that the woman behind it had long since chosen a different life. This absence did not weaken her presence. Instead, it transformed her into something rare, an artist defined not by overexposure, but by mystery. Unlike many performers whose careers faded gradually, Bobbie Gentry exited with intention. There was no decline in ability, no creative exhaustion, no loss of relevance. If anything, her songwriting had grown sharper, her production more sophisticated, and her artistic vision more confident. Yet she seemed to understand something that few artists ever do, that there is a point where creative freedom and personal peace no longer coexist comfortably within the spotlight. She had already reshaped the industry in her own quiet way, and perhaps she felt no obligation to remain as a symbol once her work was done. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, her name surfaced only occasionally, usually in retrospectives or critical reevaluations. Music historians began to reassess her catalog, recognizing how far ahead of her time she truly was. She had fused storytelling traditions of the American South with pop accessibility, jazz phrasing, and blues textures, creating songs that felt cinematic long before concept albums became fashionable. Her voice, smoky and restrained, conveyed emotion without exaggeration, allowing listeners to fill in the spaces with their own interpretations. What made her songwriting especially powerful was its restraint. She never told audiences what to feel. Instead, she presented scenes, fragments of conversations, quiet moments, and unresolved endings. This approach invited listeners into the narrative rather than instructing them how to respond. It was a literary technique disguised as popular music, and it set her apart from nearly everyone else on the charts at the time. As conversations around artistic ownership grew louder in later decades, Bobbie Gentry's career began to look almost prophetic. Long before it was common, she insisted on writing her own material, arranging her own recordings, and maintaining authority over how her music was presented. She did not frame this as a political statement or a rebellion. She simply believed that if she was going to tell her own stories, they should be told in her own voice, without compromise. This philosophy extended beyond music. She approached television with the same mindset, contributing ideas, shaping performances, and influencing direction even when official credits did not reflect her involvement. Those who worked with her often described her as focused, prepared, and deeply intuitive. She did not dominate rooms with volume or ego. Instead, she listened carefully, absorbed everything, and then offered ideas that elevated the entire production. Her collaboration with Glenn Campbell remained one of the most visible examples of her ability to connect artistically with others. Their voices complemented each other in a way that felt effortless, blending warmth with clarity. What made their partnership especially compelling was the mutual respect that defined it. Neither overshadowed the other. Instead, they met in the middle, creating performances that felt conversational rather than competitive. Even decades later, their recordings are often cited as benchmarks for duet albums, praised for their balance, sincerity, and emotional depth. As newer generations of artists began citing her as an influence, Bobbie Gentry remained silent. She did not appear at award ceremonies, did not give interviews, and did not correct rumors or speculation. This silence frustrated some and fascinated others. In an era where artists often feel pressured to explain themselves, her refusal to participate in her own mythology felt intentional. She allowed the work to stand alone, untouched by retrospection or revision. This choice also protected the original magic of her music. Without constant reinterpretation from its creator, her songs remained open-ended. Each listener could discover them in their own time, through their own lens. A teenager hearing her voice for the first time decades after its release could connect with it just as deeply as someone who heard it on the radio in 1967. That timelessness is rare, and it speaks to the universality of her storytelling. Financial independence played a quiet but crucial role in this freedom. Bobbie Gentry understood contracts, publishing rights, and long-term value at a time when many artists were encouraged to focus solely on performance. By retaining control over her work, she ensured that she would never be forced back into the spotlight for financial reasons. This independence allowed her to live on her own terms, free from the cycle of reinvention that traps so many performers. As the internet era arrived, interest in her life intensified once again. Online forums, documentaries, and music essays attempted to piece together clues about her whereabouts and daily life. Some claimed sightings, others repeated secondhand stories, but nothing was ever confirmed. She neither denied nor acknowledged any of it. In doing so, she maintained complete control over the final chapter of her story. What cannot be disputed is her lasting impact. Artists across genres have drawn inspiration from her willingness to blend styles, her commitment to storytelling, and her refusal to conform to industry expectations. She showed that vulnerability did not require exposure, that strength could be quiet, and that success did not have to mean permanence in the public eye. In many ways, Bobbie Gentry represents an alternative definition of legacy. Rather than being measured by constant output or prolonged visibility, her legacy is measured by influence, by the doors she opened, and by the artists who felt empowered to follow their instincts because she had followed hers. She proved that it was possible to step away without disappearing, to leave without being forgotten. Her music continues to circulate, not through aggressive promotion, but through genuine discovery. Vinyl collectors, streaming playlists, and film soundtracks have all played a role in introducing her work to new listeners. Each rediscovery feels personal, as though the listener has stumbled upon something intimate and rare. That sense of discovery keeps her work alive in a way that algorithms alone never could. There is something deeply human about her story. It reminds us that ambition does not always demand endless visibility, that creativity does not always need an audience to remain valid, and that fulfillment can exist beyond applause. Bobbie Gentry did not abandon her art. She simply chose not to perform it publicly anymore. In the end, her disappearance was not a mystery to be solved, but a boundary to be respected. She gave the world her voice, her stories, and her vision, and then she reclaimed her privacy. That decision, more than any chart position or award, defines her strength. Today, her influence feels more relevant than ever. As conversations around creative ownership, mental well-being, and work-life balance continue to evolve, Bobbie Gentry's choices feel less unusual and more visionary. She was not escaping fame. She was redefining success. Her story does not end with a final performance or a farewell statement. It continues every time someone presses play and hears that unmistakable voice for the first time. In that moment, Bobbie Gentry is present again, not as a public figure, but as an artist doing what she always did best, telling stories, inviting listeners in, and then leaving them space to decide what it all means.